I'm the research director at Evergreen Health, and I want to thank you guys for having me here today because I was just explaining earlier that, I'm a storyteller more than anything else. And, today I feel like I've been thinking a lot about just me 25 years ago as I was in high school and looking at, what are the different opportunities available for me in healthcare, because I always knew I belonged in healthcare. I didn't, know where I would end up. My pipe dream when I was little was to be a physician. And and by the way, we can start the recording. I don't know if you already have. But in any case, I ended up in research. And I always say this to folks that I fell into research and I kind of just stayed there. I enjoyed it enough to just say, I like it here. I'm going to hang out. So you're going to hear a lot about the research program at Evergreen Health, which is where I currently work. Thank you for joining me today.
I have a quick question for you. Is it okay with you as a presenter to have the students turn on their video? Because sometimes presenters like that so they can see that there's an audience.
I love that.
Don't.
Yeah, I love that. I love to have interaction with my folks. So yes.
Feel free to put your cameras on then, please.
Thank you. Yeah.
Anybody listening.
And if people are not comfortable, that's fine too. I'm open. So I always say that, it's hard for me to talk about my team and how awesome we are without talking about the people. And these are some of the folks I work with. So I'm the research director at Evergreen Health, and then I work with a slew of other clinical research professionals, from research assistants to coordinators to research nurses, and administrative staff. And we are so cool that we deserve 2 slides. And we welcome dogs and cats alike on our team. And for those of you that may not know about Evergreen Health, we're located in Kirkland, Washington. And I want to say about 1.5 years ago, when the first 2 patients were found in Washington State with COVID-19, they were actually found on our inpatient floors in our hospital. And this is the team that you guys are seeing that kind of kicked into gear and ran into action to help implement a lot of different clinical research trials, protocols that we now currently have on the team. And to give you guys some context in a lot of the work that we do, we worked with the National Institutes of Health to onboard these trials. And we've been doing them now. We're the only community hospital at that time that was actually part of that group, and we're still in doing that work. So it's just an incredible team. And our team is so awesome that we have, of the 22 team members that we have in our group, we have 15 different nationalities from a variety of different countries. And that's one of the things I love about us the most, is that we're so diverse in the work that we do, and we come from such different backgrounds. We have some foreign medical graduates who are on our team. We have some dentists. We have a bunch of nurses. It's pretty vast. And our research program here is actually, like I said, built in Kirkland, Washington. We're part of a larger community hospital. We have multiple different campuses, and our approach in research is a little bit unique. We want to say to our patients, anybody that walks in the door at Evergreen Health, we want to be able to offer a trial, a study for every single patient. And the reason we think that that's important is because when you think about standard medical care, when a patient walks into a doctor's office and then the doctor says, you may have this condition and here is the medication, we always want our patients to be able to have one more option to make their health better. And that is where research comes in. That is where, as you guys have all heard in the last year with COVID-19, this is the niche for us as we look at what else is out there for our patients that may help them. So it's not atypical for us to see, as you see here, our research coordinator is one of the many team members that you would see or a patient would see when they come in to provide their care, when they come in for their care here. So you would see a physical therapist, a speech therapist, maybe your doctor, and a research coordinator and a research nurse. And when you are in research, you end up doing some really cool things and you get a lot of recognition for it. And so in the last year, we have gone through, we've spoken at multiple research conferences, and sometimes these conferences can happen nationwide or sometimes they're worldwide. We had some folks that went out and did some training in Germany just about a year ago, just pre-COVID. And then, and some of the really cool things about our jobs is that we get to work on changing the landscape in medicine. And so what that means is oftentimes a new drug or a new device or something that has never been worked on before is now being researched, and it's our team that gets to do work that is above and beyond standard clinical medical care. And so it's very common for us to kind of learn more about de novo products, as we say, which is they're brand new, there's nothing like this on the market, and our patients would get benefit from it. So we get to do a lot of that here. So very high level, I'm going to talk a little bit about the research team and program, my own personal development in my career, a little bit more about clinical research and kind of the FDA process, how drugs move from clinical work to phase 4 trials. And then finally, if we have some time toward the end of the session, we can talk a little bit more about different kinds of careers that can exist in clinical research. I'm just coming at this from a hospital perspective, what kind of research roles you can expect to see in a hospital setting. But if you change the setting to pharma, it looks entirely different, and we can talk through those differences. So my background, I graduated from high school in 1996 at Roosevelt High in Seattle, Washington. And I'm a Rough Rider, as they call them. And, I actually moved here when I was 14 and a half from India. And, I joke with my family, it's an inside joke that we're sort of, I feel like our family especially, it just feels a lot to me like the American dream, because you get to come here and literally are packed in these, 8 suitcases and no food and no money, but you figure it out. And that's the journey my family went on 25 years ago. And so fast forward, when I graduated from Roosevelt High School, I went to the UW, got my Bachelor of Science there in cell and molecular biology. And then over the years, I've worked in different academic private hospital systems. And as you get to know a little bit more about the industry, I've actually had a lot of experience in manufacturing principles. So Toyota Production Systems. I've done a lot of change mastery courses. And what that means is, how do you process change on, if you have to have a change process, if you have a team that needs to go through a kind of an evolution or a change, how do you get the appropriate stakeholdership to make sure that that change is good, it's positive, and it sticks? So I've done a lot of training in that kind of work, working with people, working with systems, managing change. And I'm also certified in research as a clinical research coordinator, and have a team of about 25 individuals. And if you want to hear more about the work that we do and, get to know more about our program, you can always check out our website or contact Liesl, and should be happy to share my contact information with you. I'm happy to be, if somebody's interested in being in research, I'm happy to be a mentor to somebody in the field. Okay, so I'm going to start with my first story. I'm going to share 2 personal stories with you guys and how they were pivotal in my life. And the first story is when I was right out of college and I was in my first job, and I was a research coordinator, and I was working at a site, and I was working my butt off. In fact, I had done so well in my first 3 months of my work that my boss at that time actually wrote in my evaluation. And they said, Anita, you've done such a good job. I'm going to see if I can get you a bonus. And we will make exceptions. And back then, bonuses, they were pretty small. They were not a big amount, but it would help, right? And so I thought, well, that's great. So I got invited to this meeting, and it was a meeting with about 30 different individuals. And what ended up being the intent of that meeting, it turned out, was that a group of us together were going to be told that the business has been really bad, and that if we were in that room on that day, that we would no longer have a job in 3 months. And so this is the time I can laugh about it now. But this is the time that I joke, the time in my life where I thought into a room, I walked into a room thinking, I'm going to go get a bonus. And I walked out literally with a severance check. And, this is a true story. It happened to me in 2003. And I was one of the best coordinators on a team at an institution that was not doing very well financially. And it was a very hard lesson for me to learn, very early on in my career, which is you could do a great job as a clinical research coordinator, a CRC, but if somebody above you has made not the best business decisions, that you could still be your best player on a failing team or a failing institution. And this lesson in my life really stuck hard with me because, how is it that you could be the top player, right? Like the top A player, your MVP, and still be out of a job? And that lesson was a hard one for me to learn. And so as I went through the process of, evolution in my career, metamorphosis, this always nagged me is what could I have done to manage it better? And what can I do so this doesn't happen to me again? And so as I kind of grew up in my world of research, this is back in 2003, as you can see, it was my series of unfortunate events that happened. I started that thought stayed with me. What could I do better? I ended up in a different role, working as a research coordinator again at the Benaroya Research Institute. And I worked with children at that time in type 1 diabetes, trying to figure out, what kind of pumps might work better, what kind of medications might work better for children with type 1 diabetes. And that thought never left me, and I realized in that moment that, yeah, I liked working with patients. I enjoyed working with on trials. But what I really wanted is not just to have that one-on-one interaction with the patient, but I wanted to be able to impact a whole disease, right? So, or a whole department of diseases. So the question popped in my mind, well, is that the road I want to be on? Do I want to be a manager where I'm thinking about not just the patient, but the system and the team and the environment in which we're doing our work? So back in 2006, I made that decision that, yep, I do think I needed a little bit more autonomy. And so I decided to apply and got into the research manager position. And fast forward, I was a research manager for a couple of years back in 2007, and I just had my first baby. And this is my second story, my second pivotal moment, I think, in my life where, I say my why developed. So here you have to know, I was already in, research. I had been doing research trials for a large number of years. I was a manager of a department. And I just had a baby. And along at the same time in my life, my mom was diagnosed with leukemia. And this was 6 weeks into me having my first baby. And so if you think about what a person goes through in that moment, right? Somebody who is supposed to be taken care of, like me and my child, my mom is local, she's going to help me. I ended up being the person that takes care of somebody else. So here I would take my child, to the oncology appointments, and I would talk to the physician as my mom was on her way. The diagnosis took a couple of weeks to figure out. The doctor one day sat down with me, my mom, my dad, and my infant and said, now, here's what you need to know about this disease, about oncology, about, oncology drugs in general, and leukemia, which is what my mom was diagnosed with. And he held up this pill, and this pill was like, this big, it was this big. And he said, if all goes well, you will be taking this pill, to my mom, for the rest of your life. And if all goes well, you will be in remission in a few years and you will not die of cancer. And I had done all this research about chemotherapy and radiation and all the things that cancer meant. And I was thinking to myself, wait a minute, how is that even possible? And I asked the doctor, how is that even possible? And he had no idea that I was in research. And he goes on to say, well, it's because, research has grown so much in the world of oncology that we don't have to do these big systemic, reactive treatments anymore for patients. We now have drugs that target the actual tumor, that target the actual disease, and your mom will be better. And so fast forward, it's now been 14 years. My mom got to see 3 grandchildren grow up. She's still kicking around, doing great. She just got her COVID-19 vaccination. And she's led a really good life, and really good and healthy life, because she was in remission in a couple of years. And so this is the story for why I say my why developed, because I realized in that moment that research was a thing I fell into. When I ended up not going to med school, I had told myself, well, let me see what research is like. And then I just kind of stayed there and grew and grew and grew, and realized after 6 or 7 years, this is why I'm here. This is why I do research. And so let's talk more about research and sort of the drug development pathway. So if you see on the screen here, and this is one thing I want you to get out of today's, if there's one thing I want you to get, it's this, right? As clinical trials develop in research, we always end up with the preclinical phase, which is a drug is being looked at on a much more basic science level. And then it sort of starts transforming, where you apply for your phase 1 study. And a phase 1 study is where you have first time in humans testing, first time that you're looking at, does this drug, maybe it's an aspirin, maybe it's a Tylenol, maybe it's an Excedrin, does this drug, is it safe for a human being to take? That is your phase 1 trial, where you're presenting your data to the FDA to say, yep, it's safe, please move us forward to phase 2. And that's where phase 2 asks the same question. Is it still safe? And part 2, is it efficacious? And efficacy is something that we talk about, where we ask the question, does it do what it's supposed to do? Is it able to actually prevent the headache? Is it able to say what it's supposed to do? And so yes, if the answer to that question is yes, the data is showing in a small number of people that, yep, it is efficacious and it is safe, then you get moved on to phase 3, where you do the exact same research. And you say, well, we know it worked in 100 people and then 1,000 people, but does it work in 3,000 people? And so that's where you start doing your phase 3. And phase 3 is a really important phase, because this is where you start to see a lot of the side effects and things, all of the weird things you would expect to see on a drug, those things they talk about in the ads, like you may get headaches and this and that and the other. That is the data we're collecting. We're trying to find out, if you take this drug, what else can happen, right? What else is it possible to happen? That's where a lot of the phase 2 and phase 3 data gets collected. And then the last part of this is when a drug actually comes to market, which is phase 4, and the FDA may say, yeah, this actually looks really good, and we think that we need to approve this drug on the market, and now a patient is able to basically take it like as an over-the-counter medication, or a doctor may be able to prescribe it. And by the way, this is the process, just to give you guys some context. This is the process that all of the trials that we're working on in the last year for COVID-19, this is what remdesivir went through. You guys have probably heard that term a million times by now. This is what a lot of the other drugs that you're hearing about, this is what the Pfizer vaccine went through, the Moderna vaccine is going through. A lot of the drugs that we work on, guess what? We end up following this pathway for every single one, because it is a regulation. So one of the things that we do that's unique about Evergreen Health is that we really try and support the patient in their entire diagnostic pathway. So if you take a look at any particular disease and you say, this patient is newly diagnosed or early diagnosed with, say, cancer or with diabetes, the goal, we look for trials in that population, and we ask ourselves the question, could we have diagnosed them better, sooner? Are there early interventions? So in the case of COVID, for example, last year, we onboarded a bunch of trials where all we were doing is testing on the strips. Can we diagnose them within an hour, within 2 hours, within 3 hours? Can we do a saliva test? Can we do a blood test? Can we do a nasal test? And so that is the work that we were doing last year. And we do this similar work in Parkinson's, and we're looking at genetics of Parkinson's disease, for example. So we're asking the question, before the Parkinson's symptoms manifest themselves in patients, can we actually do a genetics test to see if the patient is predisposed? Those are the kinds of trials that we want to onboard in the early diagnosis phase. In the mid-diagnosis phase, our goal is to look at symptom management and preventing advanced disease. So here we know the patient has had the disease for several years, and at this point, we're just trying to manage and prevent them from getting worse. And so the kinds of trials that we onboard usually involve disease management, right? Symptom management, disease management. And then finally, we have the most advanced trials. So this is for your most advanced patient. They are end stage Parkinson's disease, end stage cancer. And here we want to ask the question, what can we do, not just to prolong the patient's life, but really to improve the quality of that patient's life? And I can tell you the best stories in research. I can share stories upon stories upon stories of how I can tell you one story where we had a patient who one day came in on a I'm sorry, not a stretcher, but a wheelchair. She came in on a wheelchair, and we put her on this trial where it gave her access to this drug, and then the drug became open label, which means that, she got an extension of it. And after about 5 or 6 years of having been on this trial with this drug, she actually, several years later, walked out of our building on her 2 feet. So this lady who had come in a wheelchair one day actually walked out. And that was just, she wrote us a letter. And in the letter, she said, I have felt so good. I have not felt as good as I have, in a long time. And so she decided to do a kitchen remodel in her home. And after she had finished her remodel, this patient said, I was feeling so good. I realized I hadn't done my backsplash. And so I decided to even just get down and get my backsplash done, which she did herself. So in her letter, she sent us a copy of her kitchen with her backsplash, and just thanking us for the fact that she had been on this drug for several years before it even came to market. And that is the beauty of research, is that we can give access to therapies to patients long before they even come on the market. So if we're doing a good job at our work, and we end up having a study for every patient, like I talked about earlier, then this is what it looks like. If each of these black boxes that you see here is basically a trial for a patient. So if a patient is diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and they're early in their diagnosis, like we talked about, then they have a trial for them so that we can extend them from getting worse. And then if they are more advanced and they are having other kinds of symptoms, then we have these 2 trials for them. So, this is what our portfolio looked like for Parkinson's disease several years ago. And this is what we hope to do for all of our trials in all of our departments, because we want our patients to be able to have this option. So that is how we build our research clinical trial portfolio at Evergreen Health. And then we also look at the business of research. And that's really where a lot of my learnings, as I explained to you, my series of unfortunate events, one of my big learnings was, how do you actually understand the business of research and make sure that nobody loses their job again, the way that I had lost my job. And so I got very interested in business principles. And I always say I'm the science geek. My cell and molecular biology background, I'm the science geek that sort of ended up falling into business. And so now I kind of do a hybrid. My science background helps me a lot with running my business of research. And so this is how we manage our portfolio. This is called portfolio management. It's not unlike, for example, if you were into stocks management, or if you were in, like, say, game of Magic, the Gathering, playing those cards. You're always trying to replace what seems to be the least performing part of your portfolio. And so here we kind of, I can tell you, we went through a process of replacing our bottom percent of trials. And we ended up basically maximizing some more opportunities for our patients. And here I'm just kind of talking through how we track some of this data. And there's a story here I can share. So several years ago, this big certification board came to Seattle, and I actually went to their conference. And I had been on this quest of trying to figure out which other team, which other company does the same kind of tracking of metrics that I track. And as I was asking and inquiring across the nation, other programs, how do you guys do it? How do you guys do it? Nobody was doing it at all, quite the way that we were doing it. And so what I realized is, if nobody's doing it, then somebody's got to try it, right? So we're just going to try. So what started about 5 or 6 years ago at Evergreen Health is I started tracking some data just to benchmark our business patterns and kind of how it looks. And what I found out is, I knew that nobody else was doing it. And so any data, any observation, any trends I came up with would become important to share across the research community. And now, as of last year, it's been 5 or 6 years, really, there was nobody else was doing this kind of tracking. And I go around, I've been presenting at scientific conferences the data that nobody else was doing 5 or 6 years ago. And so one of the things that I want to share with you today is, when you think about the evolution of your own career and kind of being the first wave that hits the shore, as I say it, being the first person that is creating that long-term positive change, make sure any changes that you do are incremental. Go slow. That's one of the first things you'll learn about, the Toyota production system and manufacturing principles is go slow, because change is not easy. A lot of people have a hard time with it. So go slow. And then there's always going to be data that you can collect in your business. And sometimes people can get lost in data. But what's even more important is people coming first. So people first over data always, okay? And that people respond to emotions and not data. And this was one of the big learnings that I had when I was going through, change management and learning about the different manufacturing principles of the Toyota production system is people management and culture change. It doesn't happen when you produce, spreadsheets and data sets. It happens when you explain the process to a person, when you explain the journey of why we need to do it better. And then continuous process improvement. You don't have to turn over a leaf next year or the next day. Take your time, take your time, take your time. Do the same change process a little bit more every single year. And that was one of my biggest learnings is for change to really stick, long-lasting, good, positive change, that we would need to take it slow and we would need to do a little bit more every year. And there are many, many books that I can recommend for the concepts that I've talked about today. And here's just a few of them. My favorite one is the one on top. It's called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and it's a super easy weekend read. And in any job that you have in healthcare, it's going to be important for you to work with people, to have a diverse, not just a diverse understanding, but a diverse perspective of the people around you. And understanding really, how people tick, understanding, those having that high emotional intelligence about people is really important. And I think these books really talk a lot about that. And then if you are interested in healthcare at all, there's an amazing book by Sherwin Newland called Doctors. It's one of my favorites. I would highly recommend that as well. I'm a reader, and these are some of my favorites. So your big takeaways from today, number one, always there's a second chance in your career. You know, when I came here from India several years ago, I didn't realize that I wouldn't have enough money to go to college. I didn't realize I would have to work a 32-hour job and try and keep my full schedule. I didn't realize I would be going 4 years in college back to back, including summers, and taking multiple classes just so I can get done with my 4 years of college. So just know, pick something you love, do it well, and there's always going to be a second chance, as I think I got in my career. I'm still in medicine. I still enjoy the same fruits of my hard work in research as I would have had I been a physician. And then be passionate, be curious, and keep asking the 5 whys. Sometimes, you know, we run across certain issues, certain hiccups along the way, and we have to ask ourselves, why did this happen? If I'm a star performer, why did I lose the job? What made that happen? And then, you know, ask your 5 whys. There's this exercise, Google it up, Bing it up. Understand how to ask those 5 whys, because that will allow you to understand the root cause of almost any problem. That's a really important exercise. And then find a mentor. You know, if you're passionate about what you do and you want to learn more, and you go up to a person and you say, I'm really interested in this, I doubt anybody would say no to that. You know, find a mentor. There will be a mentor. If you can't find one in research, come find me, and I will be your mentor. But find a mentor, because the advantage that you have of knowing somebody in the field that can guide you along the way is just super critical. So don't feel alone in this process. And then finally, find a resource. You know, as I said 5 years ago, I couldn't find a single research team that tracked metrics and business principles the way that I was doing. And I kept looking for years and years, only to find out nobody did it. And now I'm the person that's going across the different, you know, research programs in the country and sharing with people, here's how you can do it. So if you can't find a resource, become that skill expert, become that resource, because that is the kind of leadership that our community, especially healthcare, needs. And I do want to say this, given, you know, the nature of the talk that I'm doing today and the audience, there's a huge need for diversity in medicine in general. Huge need. I cannot say enough about this. There's a need for researchers to be diverse. There's a need for healthcare professionals to be diverse. There's even a need for our patients in our clinical trials to be diverse. I just attended a seminar yesterday where they talked about how important it is to not just recruit your average, you know, John Doe on a study. You need to have a diverse, you need to have men and women of different ethnicities, of, you know, because the genetics are different. And so get involved, because as a general, our industry needs it, and even more, the research needs it, because that is the first place how drugs and devices are even made. So with that, I want to thank everybody for today. Thanks so much for your time. You can learn more about us on our website, and I open it up for any questions.
Thank you so much, Anita. We do have a couple questions, and I'm going to encourage others to take a chance to write something down in the chat. So we've got 2 questions in here so far. What's your favorite thing about researching and medicine?
Oh my gosh, the favorite thing. Oh, just one.
Just one. No, maybe a few.
Maybe a few. My favorite thing, oh boy. You know, for me, it's the patients. I mean, I have a lot of things that's the favorite, but for me, it just always comes down to patients. And that's why I wanted to be in medicine to begin with. I wanted the ability to impact a patient's life. And, you know, as I was a coordinator, I said, well, I want to work one-on-one with a patient, but what would it be like to actually manage a department where a different group of patients, a whole department of patients was, and then I asked the question that was even bigger, but what would it be like to have research at an institution where every patient that walks in the door has access to a clinical trial? So for me, I feel like my true north is the patients. My favorite part about my team right now, honestly, is that it's so diverse. Truly, that's like the best part about my team, because we joke. We have this map on one of our walls where we want to put a push pin for every single place that a person is from. And I think we could cover a lot of countries. And so just the diversity of my workplace is really important to me. And I would say that's probably my second favorite thing. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Do you have a specific way that you do your research? Is the second question.
Do I have a specific way? Yeah. So some of the things I talked about earlier, like, let me go back. I think this is one of the biggest and most important things is when you think about research, right? You want to think about the patients that you are supporting. And so one of the aspects of how I plan my research projects or how I plan my research portfolio is I always think about, do I have something for our patients in this first bucket, which is like my early diagnosed bucket? Somebody just got diagnosed. What can we offer to them that is above and beyond standard clinical care? And then I would say that's one thing that's sort of our secret sauce, as I call it. And then the other thing that I like to think about a lot is this, right? Where I'm constantly looking at our business and I'm saying, because research is important and most people think about research like these great big institutions that do research. People think, well, we're doing great work. And sometimes you don't always, you don't always make enough money to do the work, but it's important work. Well, it's true. It's important to understand that the money has to come from somewhere. You got to fund all of the good decisions that you're making, even on behalf of patients. And so when you understand the portfolio and kind of replacement strategy and business principles a little bit better, you can say, you know what, now we can afford to do some of the really important things that may not be funded, but they are important to do anyway. So I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, we actually worked with the Michael J. Fox Foundation. We wanted to understand how we can increase diversity in our research patients for Parkinson's disease. And when you look at the data of the kinds of patients that participate on clinical trials, it's sad, but it's true, that they said anybody that was not a Caucasian male was considered diverse. So you could be a Caucasian female and you would be considered diverse. You could be Indian or, East Africa, for any part of the world, and you would be considered. So it was so poignant for me to understand why we needed to do this research, because if that's how you define diversity, then there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And we actually funded that project ourselves. And we said, we're going to learn more about diversity of patients and what prevents them from actually enrolling on trials. What are the biases that exist? And we were able to fund that project because we understand the business of research. Does that make sense?
Thank you so much for sharing about that. How about one more question, if anyone has one? Otherwise, I will ask. What do you wish you would have known while you were in high school? So junior, senior, 10th grade, even thinking about your future career. What's something you wish you would have known?
What is something I wish I would have known? I think a lot of kids, I have kids in high school, I have a daughter that's going to go to high school pretty soon. I have a child in middle school right now as well. I wish I knew that I didn't have to do it all, that I didn't have to do it all. Like, I remember being in college, I remember being in high school, and I was working 32 hours a week, volunteering 4 or 5 different places. I was literally outside my house, like from between work and school and studying from 6:30 to 9:30 every single day. And it was a hard life. And I wish I had known that there are always like you could push pause and reset in your career, or you could just push pause and dig deeper, take the time to dig deeper, because there is a wealth of not just knowledge, but experiences. If you really dig deep into an experience that awaits you, that I didn't have to do it all to still be called successful, to still be called, that I would still land somewhere. You have this this crazy need to check all the boxes and apply to the right schools and get the right grades and get the right volunteering and all of that. And I wish that I could tell myself back then, slow down, because, there are second chances in your career. Dig deeper, ask the 5 whys, understand why you love I thought I wanted to be in medicine, and I thought being a doctor was the only way to do it. And I realized much later in life, my why story, as I say, that, oh, research is a great place to be, and it pays my bills and it gives me the same benefit of being in medicine. So I would tell myself back then, I don't have to do it all.
Well, students, as you're pulling that up and completing that, maybe I'll ask one more question. You mentioned find a mentor as kind of in your tips. Can you talk a little bit about a mentor, maybe a mentor that you had, or the role that a mentor played and why that was significant?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So when I was at Virginia Mason, I was a very new research manager. And, I didn't understand a lot of that I do right now. And I remember meeting this one lady who kind of understood a lot of the business principles, and she ran a clinic, and she was just very well known in what she was doing. And I knew she was going to someday make it big. She's actually a consultant now for very large hospitals. Anyway, I went up to her. I was in one of her classes, and I went up to her one day and I just said, Jan, I could really, I appreciate everything and I think I have a lot to learn from you and implement that in my world, because you'll find similarities, right? The way you run a clinic is not unlike the way you run a hospital or the way you run a research program. So I went up to her and I told her, I'm a blank slate. I want to learn a lot and I'll have a lot of questions. But my questions are about how I can implement that in my workforce, in my team, in my job. And would you be open? And she was so pleasantly surprised that I wanted to pick a brain. And, I told her I'll buy her coffee, I'll buy her lunch. I just want to spend, and so what we did is we set up like this cadence of check-ins with each other over the course of 1 year, where I would go to her with a problem and she would tell me what she would do in her business and how that's different from my business. And so it was just a process of checking in with each other, like on a monthly basis, And
2 minutes.
Thank you. And we didn't have any official like mentorship program per se. You just need a person that knows what they're doing, that's open and available to answer your questions. That's your mentor. Time. Somebody who's willing to spend time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an intentional time, and having that kind of regular schedule that you're meeting and talking and building that relationship and showing gratitude to that person too, so that they feel appreciated and want to continue to invest, I'm sure is so important.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you sharing your journey and about the work that you do.